Alright, so in this video we're going to look at how I can again start off with just a simple curve, but create more of this kind of rising or floating seating condition, right? It's just going to use a simple profile curve. Obviously with this process, if you look at the other videos, it doesn't have to be a rectangle, it can be even a custom one, but it's going to again give that illusion of it kind of either emerging from an existing kind of hardscape or sidewalk to kind of give it that illusion. So what we want to do is start off with our rail curve. And from here, we're going to start to create a series of points. So curve, divide the curve, make it somewhat dense or have a variety of these. And again, what we want to do to make sure, because everything's kind of, again, key to orientate these appropriately. So I'm going to go to the horizontal frame. Oops. And again, what I want this to do, I'll reduce this just so I can see it a little better, is that I want, again, in this case, I want them to face to the right, being, again, profile curve. So I'm going to go ahead and deconstruct these to reconstruct a new one. So again, I want the z value for this to be the y, and oops, I want that to be the origin, right? And then I want the y to be the x, but in the other direction. So I'm just going to give that a negative x value. All right, so now I can see that they're going to orientate that way, which is pretty much the standard kind of default size or orientation. So as, again, in order to give it that rising effect, I actually want to move these in the z direction. So now I can, let's turn this off for now. So I want to, again, move. And I want them to kind of go from being on the plane to, or on that curve to rising up certain height. So I'm going to go to sets to create a range of values between 0 and 1 for my favorite graph mapper. So whatever that number is for my divide is going to be the same thing. So I can see that I've got 9 outputs, 9 values, perfect. Parameters, input, graph mapper. And we could start off with something like the Gaussian one. So it seems like they move up and then come back down, right? Oops, let's use the z value here. And it'll probably be very subtle, right? Like they just slowly go up a little bit. Can always make sure that it actually reaches that. In reality, again, I want my c to be closer to that 1.5 or 18-inch height. So I can kind of drag it up that way. So there is kind of a peak for that. I can obviously add more to these. It gets a little difficult, more dense, but I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now. Because what I want to do in order to actually create that profile, I'm going to use the curve, rectangle, and again, this is being based off of a plane. So if I just go ahead and grab it in there, it'll go ahead and start to space them according to that height. But I need to change my domain values. So again, if I look at this, I can see that the x is, again, the width of this, and then the y is going to be the height. So the white's probably, the height or the thickness of these rectangles is probably always going to stay consistent. And I want it to start from 0 and go down. So I'm going to create my own domain for that to start at 0. Give this a negative x value and do something like 0.5 for now. So it's just 6 inches thick. Let's turn this off real quick. Oops, not disable it. Just turn it off, right? So again, I can make it thinner. And again, then I want for the x, very similar to some degree. I want it to start at the 0, right? And then again, I want this idea of it kind of rising above. So I actually want it to kind of start almost below the plane, so it gives that illusion. But again, I want some variation in the width as well. So basically this B input for that domain, and again, I can use a similar process with this graph mapper. So it almost seems like it tapers. And again, I probably want it to ideally be close to that same value. So actually for this, I'm just going to drag this directly into my B. Now I can see that, again, it kind of goes from almost nothing and tapers into this wider path. So it's obviously a little kind of, it gets really minimized and reduced. But let's just look at this real quick, and let's just go ahead and use the surface and loft these together. All right, so this gives us a kind of interesting floating condition, or it's again very kind of minimal, but it will give that idea of it kind of extruding out of the ground. Maybe you don't want it to start at 0, so that kind of at least you can see it a little bit. So let's change that x to be something like 0.25 to start off. Right, so it could start off as just maybe even half. Right, and then in this case, instead of it going from 0 to 1.5, I'm just going to do it from 0.5, whatever that other, the A input is, I'll make sure that that's matching. Oops, no, that's not it. Let's go back to make that 0. I'm not sure why it's doing that right there, but it just almost just so happens to want to mess up like that. Oh, I think I know why. So if I'm starting off, oh no, I always want this to be 0. Sorry, this is, in this case, I want it to start off a little bit thicker, so I'll do 0.5. There we go. So now again, it has like a standard thickness. If you want that to come out more, maybe it's just something more like that. But this starts to give us that idea that it's kind of this floating seat that rises. And again, so this is the peak in terms of where it happens. So I can again kind of make it happen more so that there's more area to sit, but then it again kind of descends back into the ground. I want to make sure that's narrow. Obviously I can create all sorts of different types. The Bezier is a good one again. I could have it kind of almost look like it's free floating at the end. Right, and again, it's, in this case, maybe you follow the same type of graph. So again, it always stays at that kind of thickness, but then it gets wider towards the end. So there's obviously a lot of different opportunities to create this kind of floating seat. Maybe you want to make it thicker for more, so has this kind of interesting where it's maybe not suitable for seating. It stays kind of narrow, but then once it gets to the top, it's wide enough to sit on. But again, there's obviously different ways in which this can get supported. It could be supported by some type of backing or a wall. There could be posts underneath. You kind of have to be strategic to get it to actually structurally work, but this gives you at least the idea of how that form of the seating could work. So again, it's really simple, really abbreviated, short version, but again, it gives you that idea of it kind of ascending out of the ground.